This week, we finish Nehemiah and read the whole book of Esther. The last part of Nehemiah gives a survey of the settlement surrounding Jerusalem, as well as concluding the story of the rebuilding of Jerusalem itself. There are two other features worth noting. One is the prayer of national confession. Some translations say that Ezra was the one who said the prayer, but his name isn't in the Hebrew, and the priest Ezra would not have been alive when this happened. So it's probably better to leave it just as a national confession, without naming anyone in particular. But isn't it interesting that a nation would gather to confess its sin? They acknowledge what they have done wrong, say that the judgment of God has been just, and promise to do better in the future. When we visited Germany a few years ago, we saw many instances of national confession. Quite a contrast to the never apologize attitude that we're used to here at home. The second interesting feature is that the book concludes with the condemnation of mixed marriages. Do you remember the forced divorces at the end of the book of Ezra? Evidently, Ezra's attempt at reforming the people's practices didn't quite take, since Nehemiah had to do it again. As I mentioned before, this is not the only point of view in the Bible. The book of Ruth, for example, praises the marriage of a Judean with a Moabite woman. But here the theme of purity surfaces again. Well, I'm going to assume that you don't need me to interpret the story of Esther for you. It's straightforward and easy to follow. The meat of the story is in the first 7 chapters, and the last 3 are a wrap-up. I'm sure you will enjoy the story. One of the most memorable lines, for me anyway, is in the message that Mordecai sent to Esther. Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. I hope you will consider when you've found yourself in the right place at the right time, even if it wasn't the emperor's palace. This story has some surprising and engaging heroes. I particularly admire the Empress Vashti, who kept her self-respect even though she lost her crown. Then there's Mordecai, Esther's cousin, who was faithful to his Jewish upbringing and a loyal subject of Persia, and who never flinched from speaking the truth. And of course, Esther herself, who's initially admired for her beauty, but in the long run is remembered for her bravery. The 2 other main characters are rather less admirable. Emperor Ahasuerus, probably Xerxes, is portrayed as easily led and perhaps not too bright. And of course there is the villain Haman. When this story is told in synagogues, people hiss when Haman's name is mentioned. And the story is told every year during their holiday called Purim. And that is the conclusion of the story. This is why we celebrate Purim. The next Purim, by the way, will be March 16th to 17th, 2022. Jewish folks make it a festive time. Although the word God is never mentioned in the book, the story of Esther is retold as testimony to the wonderful ways God works for the well-being of the people of God. One never knows when one may be the instrument of God, being in the right place for just such a time as this.